In the world of meteorology, some years pass quietly, the storms and stories of which are told briefly and fade into the headlines. Some years, however, refuse to fade, solidifying themselves permanently into our very national identity. For most of you here, you're already familiar with the fact that 2011 was one of those scarring years. 2011 was a watershed year for tornadoes in the United States, a dividing line, a distinct before and after that left vulnerabilities exposed and long-held assumptions stripped bare. I'm here today to make the case that the 2011 severe weather season fundamentally shaped how this country understands tornado risk, response, and loss. Not by proving that the change happened, but by examining through a ripple effect how it happened and why those effects still matter today. This video will discuss how one season together sent consequences radiating outward, immediate, distant, and long-term. And the first element of the ripple we must discuss begins in the atmosphere itself. From April into May, the United States experienced one of the most violent tornado seasons in modern history. More than 550 people in the modern era lost their lives. Thousands more were injured, and entire towns were leveled within the span of a few weeks. But this certainly wasn't random. In fact, the atmosphere had been building towards it. The spring of 2011 unfolded under a strong La Niña pattern in the Pacific, a setup NOAA has long associated with active severe weather seasons across the central and southeastern United States. That pattern helped position a powerful, persistent jet stream over the plains and deep south, creating repeated rounds of strong wind shear. At the surface, warm, moist air from the Gulf surged northward day after day, colliding with cooler air masses sweeping in from the west. Instability built quickly, and wind profiles stacked cleanly. And the result was an atmosphere that repeatedly reset itself, one that was primed for long-track, violent tornadoes. Supercells formed in environments rich with moisture, extreme instability, and exceptional wind shear. And it's here, under this amount of volatility in place, that the first drop for the ripple begins. Between April and May of 2011 alone, more than 1,700 tornadoes tore across a swath of the United States. But what makes the 2011 tornado season so unique isn't simply the sheer number of tornadoes that occurred, but rather the brutality of the storms themselves, the density of the violent tornadoes, and the fact that they struck heavily populated areas, defying so many of the preconceived notions that Southerners held about these storms for decades. On April 27th of 2011 alone, the Super Outbreak spawned more than 360 tornadoes in a single day, taking 348 lives with it. This once-in-a-lifetime outbreak also included 4 EF5 tornadoes and 12 EF4 tornadoes in a 24-hour period. And unbelievably, it would be less than 1 month later, in Joplin, Missouri, on May 22nd, that another EF5 would take 158 lives, the single deadliest tornado in modern American history. And only 48 hours after that, yet another EF5 strikes in Piedmont, Oklahoma. For those interested, that's 6 EF5 tornadoes and 17 EF4 tornadoes in a 2-month period. For many, the trauma unfolded in real time. These events were largely televised as they occurred, while millions across the country watched in shock and horror. This was also the first outbreak that was widely seen in real time on social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook. This time, the nation wasn't simply hearing about the devastating news over a quick news segment. Rather, we watched in real time together. Most of all, though, the 2011 tornado season laid bare an uncomfortable reality that despite having the most advanced radar and modern forecasting tools, the death toll was higher by far than any event in modern history. And yes, many of these events throughout the season were once-in-a-lifetime meteorological events. But it was also a wake-up call to the fact that the systems in place, from sirens to public communication, had failed to protect people, Joplin being one of the most macabre of all. Dozens died not because they weren't warned, but because multiple warnings had been received and simply weren't trusted, weren't clear, or they had just been realized a little too late. 2011 defied what most people thought possible of a severe weather season in the 21st century. Every single expectation of what people believed tornadoes should look or be or behave like were broken. Public perception of them wasn't just changed, it was seemingly completely obliterated. And this is the moment that the surface of the water breaks and the ripples begin to move outward. The first ripple we're going to examine in this context is the direct aftermath and those who are immediately impacted by the severe weather of the 2011 season. Of course, the physical destruction in this aftermath is immediate and overwhelming. In Tuscaloosa alone, more than 12% of the city is destroyed. For smaller communities like Hackleburg in Alabama, roughly 75% of a town of 1,500 are gone overnight. Many of the hardest hit communities in the Deep South were rural and economically vulnerable. Families were suddenly without homes, without insurance coverage, and without the financial ability to rebuild or simply pick up their lives and relocate. More than 500 people lost a family member in this season. Thousands more suffered life-altering injuries, be it an amputation, spinal trauma, permanent disfigurement, and the loss of their livelihoods as an area that is largely dependent on blue-collar work. One 2013 study examining tornado-related deaths from the 2011 Super Outbreak found that nearly half of the fatalities were caused by blunt or penetrating trauma. The majority of the deaths were trauma-related and often too severe or complex to be neatly categorized. And these details aren't for shock value. They matter because they underscore the violence of what is actually experienced by these victims and families. But this is only the first layer of impact. In the years that followed, studies consistently found elevated rates of PTSD, storm-related anxiety, and depression among survivors. Many reported that thunder, sirens, or darkening skies triggered flashbacks. Children who lived through the 2011 season grew up carrying vivid memories of basements, frantic evacuations, and watching their homes disappear. Research focused on Joplin found that more than 1/4 of the survivors still met criteria for probable PTSD more than 2 years after the tornado, and even then, the mental health services provided to the victims of Joplin were widely underutilized. And in fact, many of the studies that we've talked about on this channel for Joplin specifically have noted that trauma typically doesn't even present symptoms until 2.5 years or later. So we still could take a look at the full scope of the trauma and PTSD from those victims. And finally, for the weather enterprise itself in this first ripple, the events were nothing short of a reckoning. Forecast offices and emergency managers saw clearly that warnings alone could not prevent loss of life and trauma. Severe weather could no longer be treated now as purely a meteorological problem. This was, and still is, a public health issue, demanding closer integration between physical science, social science, and long-term community support, something James Spann has talked about consistently in his experience with the 2011 Super Outbreak specifically. In the areas just outside of the first ripple or points of impact, just beyond the path of destruction, life appears unchanged. Houses remained standing and streets remained intact. But for those nearby, normalcy came with a heavy mix of relief and guilt, the quiet realization that it could have been us. Each name on those casualty lists for these tornadoes rippled through extended family members and friends of social circles, turning the outbreak into a defining marker in countless personal histories. I know for myself, the loss of my mother is the single most defining event of my life, and I can't begin to imagine the loss of a family member to a physical trauma from a storm. And that is the reality for 550 families, not just individuals, but the entire families of these people who lost someone in the 2011 season. Over time, the storms became woven into the regional identity, a shared reference point, a collective memory, all of which reshaped how communities understood vulnerability and proximity to a risk. This ripple forced hard questions. Could more have been done to save some of those people in the 2011 season? And were the current approaches enough? It's important to remember contextually that in 2011, many of the systems that we are currently familiar with now were relatively new at the time. The transition, for example, from county-based warnings to polygon-based warnings had only occurred a few years prior in 2007. In the wake of 2011 now, broadcast meteorologists were increasingly shifting towards a hyper-local guidance, not just where the tornado warning may have been in the county or for which counties, but really getting down into the street-level broadcast meteorologist coverage, which I think is really largely thanks to James Spann's coverage of the 2011 season. Ripple 3, which is more distant, those watching at the time, and the national consciousness. I want to now shift to talking about the cultural shift that this outbreak prompted and how it materialized across the national consciousness. One of the extremely unique aspects of the 2011 season and outbreaks that we talked about is the fact that they were largely covered live on air. Not just locally this time, but nationally. Around 2:30 p.m. Central Time on April 11th of 2011, legendary Alabama meteorologist James Spann was already covering the active event when the Coleman tornado touches down live on air. This would be the first of several violent tornadoes that would be broadcast live that afternoon on the news station, including the EF4 that very infamously tore through Tuscaloosa. Millions watched live on air together as storms swallowed neighborhoods whole in real time. Seasoned meteorologists were left stunned, some visibly emotional and even praying. This wasn't the first time that tornadoes had been filmed, of course, but it was the first time an outbreak of this scale unfolded live, hour after hour, before a national audience. A macabre, collective trauma mediated through modern media. This was, however, the first time that social media amplified this effect. Warnings were shared, survivors checked in with family and friends on Facebook, students at the University of Alabama campus used social media platforms to tell loved ones that they were alive and okay. In one singular day, referring to the Super Outbreak, social media became an informational but powerful tool for crisis communication during severe weather like we had never seen before. And this ripple isn't just about technology per se, but a contrived proximity. People thousands of miles away now felt connected to the danger as it unfolded, watching this trauma happen. And while this specific cultural shift is uniquely difficult to quantify, its influence is clear. Ask many meteorologists or storm chasers that you know what drew them to storm chasing, and I promise you, in part, there will be some influence of the 2011 season there. This particular ripple from the 2011 season is so unique because it comprises of people that were entirely untouched by the outbreak, yet were still so influenced. A group that together realized that the scale of the destruction the atmosphere could produce and the responsibility that came with witnessing it. A generation truly influenced by the happenings of this one singular storm season. Now that we've traced all of the immediate and near impacts of the 2011 season, we arrive at the larger question. How did it reshape our culture around severe weather, and where does that leave us now? More than a decade later, after the 2011 season, the ripples are still very much visible. The ways in which we described the 2011 tornado season's ripple effect thus far have all been changes along the way that have led us to where we are now. Changes in daily life for those who were directly impacted by the storms, of course, changes to institutional policy, changes within operations of the weather enterprise, and even the way children have grown up. For those directly impacted, the loss didn't end when the debris was cleared. Many still live with the absence of loved ones, permanent physical injuries, financial burdens that can never fully be resolved. Children who were young in 2011 grew up shaped by that disruption, by fear, memory, and an understanding of risk. But the legacy extends far beyond the survivors. Across the southeast and southern Missouri, communities have been conditioned to reshape the ways in which they prepare for, respond to, and ultimately talk about tornadoes. Annual memorials in place like Tuscaloosa and Joplin aren't only about remembrance. They're about teaching the next generation that these storms can and will happen again. In Alabama specifically, the imprint of the 2011 season has become part of the local identity, much like Hurricane Katrina and the reshaping of New Orleans and Louisiana. And the cultural shift, well, it's complicated. The truth is, I am constantly asking myself and questioning whether or not I genuinely believe that people are prepared for and care about and listen to tornado warnings and severe weather risk. On one hand, research points to warning fatigue and the cry wolf effect. And on the other, lived experience has taught myself and so many others that when it's time to take the atmosphere seriously, they do. And they get into shelter and they are prepared and they do listen. And I think ultimately both can be true at once. Institutionally, the 2011 season was the ultimate catalyst for change. Deaths in the 500 plus range for the year of severe weather in modern times was the metaphorical fatal blow to the old systems in place, making room for the new ones to emerge. And each sector made sure to use this opportunity to the best of their ability. For the physical science arm of the weather enterprise, meteorologists and scientists got to work implementing sweeping changes, most notably creating the introduction of impact-based warnings in 2012. This program was aimed at providing risk communication within weather warnings that would provide more information while remaining clear and concise. This program is the reason we have things like the particularly dangerous situation tags or the catastrophic tags on tornado warnings, and let's say the 80-mile-an-hour destructive tags on a severe thunderstorm warning. It's the reason we get to have the hail size, the DVD size, and wind speeds on our severe thunderstorm warnings. Very effective. And we can't forget about my favorite sector of the weather enterprise, without question, the social scientists who were very quickly brought even further into forecasting discussions after the 2011 season, which was a shift that was almost unheard of before 2011. This, again, is something that James Spann has been extremely vocal about in bringing the presence of social scientists into the realm of the physical science of meteorology, and I think they have done a really excellent job thus far. And perhaps the biggest change, maybe I've said that before, but definitely the biggest change to the Enterprise itself from 2011 is the inclusion of social media and smartphones. From this point forward, now mobile alerts and weather apps are becoming the norm rather than the exception, and the entire industry begins to pivot towards this new and rapidly expanding method of communication. Within a few years, tornadoes were no longer treated as these isolated freak events. They became a shared national experience, one that demanded better communication, stronger preparation, and a deeper understanding of human behavior. Because of 2011, tornado risk was no longer just a meteorological problem. It became a question of psychology, a question of trust, and whether we can get people to not only act, but to act in time. Today in 2026, we live in the very long shadow of the 2011 tornado season, and more than a decade later, we are still navigating how to live through it. I have always said on my channel that I absolutely refuse to cover events that have just unfolded. It is the reason I spent several years waiting for the data and long-term ramifications of the 2021 Mayfield event to talk about it, and I still feel like it was way too early. It's the reason I frequently prefer to cover tornadoes that are long past in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early aughts. And that is simply because I genuinely do not believe that I, as someone who prefers to talk about the historical context of a severe weather outbreak and event, I do not believe that that can be done even 5 years after an event sufficiently. There is no way that we can take a longer scope look at a tragedy that unfolded 2 weeks, 6 months, a year ago and understand the full ramifications of it. And in many ways, I genuinely believe that we are still experiencing the long-term ripples and ramifications of the 2011 season. But if there's one thing I do want to leave you with, it's the idea that the legacy of 2011 in the Weather Enterprise isn't just in the physical memorial parks across Alabama or in Joplin. It's around all of us. It's at work when you encounter the cousin of a Joplin survivor, or me over this past Thanksgiving when I coincidentally met a survivor of Hackleburg out of nowhere, or in your neighbor that comes and checks on you during or after severe weather to make sure that you're okay and have a place to go. And it's in those moments that you suddenly realize that you are living in the echo of the prolific and unforgettable season of 2011. As we move into the post-2020 era within the Weather Enterprise, particularly as we become all consumed by AI and different elements of new forecasting and warning systems, there are so many different things that we're going to have to navigate, be them good or bad. And really, these are discussions that deserve their own time and place. So I will refrain for now. But I think that really concludes my assertion of 2011 being not just a freak meteorological year, but truly the reshaping of our lives in the context of meteorology. And if by the end of this video I have earned your subscription, if you enjoyed the video or any of my other content, I would love it if you could like the video, or if I've earned a subscription, if you could subscribe to the channel. These things help me out in the algorithm. And that's it. I like to save that to the end so I don't bombard you all with it. Since I don't have anything else, I'll just quickly talk about meeting a Joplin Hackleburg survivor. I was at Thanksgiving this past year, and I don't know what it is, but I think I have a gift of sniffing out people who are tornado survivors or who are fellow weather nerds. It must be something, because I promise I don't just go up to people and talk about weather. I really don't. In fact, I try to avoid it at all costs. But interestingly, I went to Thanksgiving, met a few new people, wonderful time, and happened to ask where this person was from, and they said Alabama. I said, what part? They said Hackleburg. Oh my gosh. We talked about the Hackleburg storm, and before I could even say it, they had just stressed how important James Spann was to their life as someone who lived in Alabama dealing with severe weather, and for that event specifically, they already knew everything that needed to be done beforehand and were very weather aware and attributed every single part of that to James Spann, and even remembered James Spann coming to their school as a child and talking to them. So I just, as if we couldn't give James Spann any more flowers, we're going to give him a few more, because how incredible is that to have met a real survivor. And it just, it was a beautiful, unique experience. So wanted to share that with you all. That's all I have. I will see you guys in the next one next week. Bye. I'm gonna use my iPad like an old lady, and I'm touching it like an old lady too. You see this little chicken claw? This is what happens when you turn 30, I think. And there's nothing wrong with that.